Let's look at Elon Musk's filing with the SEC. Okay, hold on. Minimize this. I'll make sure that we're looking at the same thing. Then I'm going to take it back out and give you all the rundown. And we all know, oh, that's not gonna work. Okay, hold on. Let's just try like this. There we go. And like that. Nope, it's not gonna work. I'll have to maximize it. Okay, give me 1 second. So, Dr. John Campbell. There's nothing that would not surprise me in this world anymore. We all know what's going on with Twitter. Elon Musk decided to buy it. Says, yeah, Twitter's it's a pretty good free speech platform. Let's buy it. How much would it cost? Multiple lawsuits in the works because Elon Musk had acquired 9.2% shareholding in the company, but apparently failed to disclose that he had exceeded 5% ownership as required by law under SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission regulations. Disclosed that he owned 9.2% after having gotten there, but not disclosed it at 5%. So people who had sold their stock after the time Elon had acquired 5%, but before the time he made the public announcement where the stock price jumped 20%, they sold. Whoever sold, they sold not knowing that Elon had in fact attained 5% ownership. They're claiming class action status because Elon had to have disclosed it. They got, let's just call it fraudulently deprived from potential profits, because the argument would be they would not have sold it had they known Elon acquired 5%. Whatever. That's one lawsuit. Then there's SEC potentially going after Elon for failing to file filings with the SEC. So you can have a civil suit based on alleged torts of not having disclosed. SEC is going after Elon for allegedly having not disclosed, but those are minor sort of statutory offenses. Elon promises to buy, get into an agreement, says, I'll buy it. I want to look at your books. Twitter has to open its books and disclose information, good and bad, that might affect the agreed upon purchase price that was in the offer to purchase. One of the issues was whether or not Twitter had been publicly misleading people, including the SEC, in their court filings, in their SEC filings over a decade, as to the actual number of bot or spam accounts on the platform. They've been saying 5% or less. The obvious reason is Twitter's only method of making money is through advertising dollars, which, if you spend $1 and you think that there's only 5%, let me just make sure I can get my math here. Let's say you spend $10 on an ad, knowing that 5% of the recipients of that ad are fake accounts. Okay, well then it's worth 5% less than it would have otherwise been had everyone been bona fide eyes. If you spend $10 on an ad, being told that the bot spam accounts are only 5%, but they actually represent 20%, well, you are wasting money on 15% that you thought were real people that are not. So when Elon says, I'm going to buy the company, I'd like to make sure that you are actually accurate, honest, or at least not even truthful, that it's accurate when you say there's only 5% bot, spam, whatever boosted accounts, because that will affect my purchase price. If it turns out half of Twitter are fake accounts, I'm not spending $44 billion on it. I might not even spend half of that because it might actually be worthless. So there's an offer to purchase, an accepted offer to purchase, and the parties have to do their due diligence, open their books, yada, yada. Elon says, I think you've been misleading me and I might want to back out of this deal. Twitter says, you can't back out of the deal. We've satisfied our obligations and now you're backing out for no good reason. And he says, no, there is a good reason. I don't believe you're being truthful. I believe you're hiding information. And he's made a filing to that effect, which he filed, I think it's June 6th. So let's see here. United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, so we got here. If the person, let's see what this is. Yeah, okay, this is all nonsense. Okay, Elon Musk. This is a public document, Schedule 13D. Number of shares owned, 73 million shares. Okay. 9.6% of the company. Interesting filing. Purpose of the transaction on June 6th. Here, let's highlight this part. I cannot highlight, that'll be impossible to read. The reporting person delivered a letter to the issuer reiterating his request for certain data and information necessary to facilitate his evaluation of spam and fake accounts on the issuer's platform, and reserving his rights resulting from the issuer's refusal to provide such data and information in material breach of the issuer's obligations under its merger agreement with the reporting person. The foregoing description of the reporting person's letter is qualified in its entirety by reference to the full text of the letter, a copy of which is attached hereto as Exhibit O. So pretty straightforward, and let's just see what the letter says. You gotta love this. By the way, everyone should have. One of the best takeaways from the practice of law, at least for me, I'm going to take this out. This is not legal advice. This is practical practice advice. In law, you at some point you become conditioned or traumatized to understand that everything you ever write to anyone can and very likely will find its ways under the eyes of a judge at some point in time. Emails to your client, emails to opposing counsel, emails to third parties, emails to witnesses. So my absolute total takeaway from the practice of law is draft everything and anything as though one day a judge is going to read it, and you will tailor your language accordingly. I say that even with my Twitter feed, but Twitter's totally public and intended to be public, hence, stylistically why some tweets are drafted the way they are. But people sometimes think I can be a total a-hole privately. I'll write an email lambasting someone, chewing someone out, and it's going to feel so good to do it. And then one day you're going to be sitting there and a judge is going to be reading your words to somebody else, staring at you afterwards, and you're going to have to say, oh my goodness, why did I was a jerk. So that's the practical law advice. Reading this letter, this letter was not drafted as though someone might see it. This letter was drafted as though someone would necessarily see it, and they knew it. So read it accordingly. But my advice in law and in life, if you draft everything as though the judge or a judge, as in a legal judge or the legal judge or a spiritual judge will one day read it, you might weigh your words accordingly, and it might make for a happier, more peaceful life. To Twitter, Vijay Gad, Chief Legal Officer. Dear Ms. Gad, we are in receipt of correspondence sent on Twitter's behalf dated June 1, responding to Mr. Musk's request for data and information described in my letters dated May 25 and May 31. Mr. Musk does not agree with the characterizations in Twitter's June 1 letter. Twitter has, in fact, refused to provide the information that Mr. Musk has repeatedly requested since May 9, 2022, to facilitate his evaluation of spam and fake accounts on the company's platform. Twitter's latest offer to simply provide additional details regarding the company's own testing methodologies, whether through written materials or verbal explanations, is tantamount to refusing Mr. Musk's data requests. And it's easy. This is an easy letter to write, but this is beautifully drafted. I don't want your explanations. I don't want your methodologies. Give me access to the data. I'll look at it. I'll break it down the way I want. And if we disagree on the outcome of those calculations, we'll talk then. But don't make my decision for me. Don't, spit in my face and tell me it's raining. I want to test the fluid that you just applied to my face. Bad analogy. Who cares? Twitter's efforts to characterize it otherwise is merely an attempt to obfuscate and confuse the issue. Mr. Musk has made it clear that he does not believe the company's lax testing methodologies are adequate, so he must conduct his own analysis. And we know how this works now. This is no different than polling data. You can choose to change definitions, change thresholds, change criteria that will radically affect the outcome. So I don't want your methodology. I want your data. The data he has requested is necessary to do so. So let's just see here. I think this is going to refer to the agreement. As noted, under various terms of the merger agreement, Twitter is required to provide data and information that Mr. Musk requests in connection with the consummation of the transaction. It's very romantic. Twitter's obligations to provide Mr. Musk with information is not, as the company's June 1st letter suggests, limited to, quote, very specific purpose, facilitating the closing of the transaction. Even if it were limited to that very specific purpose, that's a specific purpose with broad implications. It's not even clear that if Musk doesn't get this information, that he'll be able to secure the financing if he needed any. Now, the problem is I think this was a cash deal, in which case Elon's going to say, can't blame it on a third party. Well, the bank won't give it to me unless you prove this. But even if it was limited to the very specific purpose of facilitating the transaction, that's a very broad objective. To the contrary, Mr. Musk is entitled to seek, and Twitter is obligated to provide information and data for inter alia, among other things. Any reasonable business purpose related to the consummation of the transaction, section 6.4. Twitter must also provide reasonable cooperation in connection with Mr. Musk's efforts to secure the debt financing, so he is going to get financing, necessary to consummate the transaction, including by providing information, quote, reasonably requested by Musk. Mr. Musk's request for user data not only satisfies both criteria, but also meets even Twitter's narrowed interpretation of the merger agreement, as this information is necessary to facilitate the closing of the transaction. This is beautifully written. It's actually, it's sufficiently easy to understand, even for a layperson. And there's not a wasted word in there. As Twitter's prospective owner, Mr. Musk is clearly entitled to the requested data to enable him to prepare for transitioning Twitter's business to his ownership and to facilitate his transaction financing, yada, yada, yada. Let's go to the last paragraph. This is beautiful. If Twitter is confident in its publicized spam estimates, Mr. Musk does not understand the company's reluctance to allow Mr. Musk to independently evaluate those estimates. As noted in our previous correspondence, Mr. Musk will, of course, comply with the restrictions provided under Section 6.4. I suspect that's confidentiality, including by ensuring that anyone reviewing the data is bound by a non-disclosure agreement, and Mr. Musk will not retain or otherwise use any competitively sensitive information if the transaction is not consummated. What do we got there? Oh, this is the last page. Based on Twitter's behavior to date, the company's latest correspondence, in particular, Mr. Musk believes the company is actively resisting and thwarting his information rights and the company's corresponding obligations under the merger agreement. This is a clear material breach of Twitter's obligation under the merger agreement, and Mr. Musk reserves all rights resulting therefrom, including the right not to consummate the transaction and his right to terminate the merger agreement. So, some interesting conundrums. I want to break out a meme. It's a conundrum. Some interesting conundrums here. Twitter might realistically have the problem that even if they provide all of the data, the raw data to him, and Elon does his own calculations, and does not publicly disclose any of that information, but doesn't go through with the sale, that's as good as confirming that there's a big problem, Houston. And so Twitter is saying, like, even if we give him all of the data, even if it remains all confidential and he doesn't exploit it for his own, potential competitive purposes, which is also one of the issues. If he doesn't go through with the purchase, one will and likely reasonably properly conclude that there's a problem with Twitter, which is going to devastate its stock price regardless after the deal falls through, which itself would probably devastate the stock price. So serious financial problems here. If I wanted to listen to mostly bots, I'd listen to Bell's automated customer service. But they're mostly bots, which means that they're partially human. I'm joking. That's just a joke. So it's interesting. The letter, it's drafted for public consumption. It's drafted for public filing so that the public will read it. And that, Elon, in addition to fighting a legal battle, if this goes south, is going to be fighting a public opinion battle, and he's fighting it publicly. Draft a letter, knowing you're going to file it, knowing it's going to be public, and the public's going to read it. And if this deal doesn't go through, and the poop hits the fan, at the very least now people can say, well, who am I going to sue? Am I going to sue Elon Musk for futzing around and bailing out of the deal? Or am I going to sue Twitter for not respecting what seem to be its obligations of disclosure and blame them for tanking the price? Or blame them for having lied or, without presuming intention, misrepresented for over a decade the actual amount of actual bots actually on the platform. Okay. It's going to go back to Rumble for 1 second. I think I saw another. No, that's the same one. Okay. So that's where it's at with the purchase. Now, some people could hypothesize that Elon's playing hardball. He might be pushing hard to try to get Twitter to drop the price, as he would absolutely be within his rights if it turns out that Twitter intentionally or accidentally has been underestimating the actual number of bots. He'd be within his rights to do it. This is not like litigation warfare for the sake of it. So inconceivable. I'm going to finish up my drink here.